And it's I don't know if it's going to get easier in October, November,
Right.
but right now it's just still a state of shock, state of disbelief, even though the postponement of the season is something that we were somewhat prepared for. Then came July 31st. Still hard to believe it's only less than 2 weeks ago. Pac-12 comes out with a conference-only schedule. Everybody has hope, starting to analyze the schedule.
Of course.
Favor ASU and whatnot. He was supposed to play USC the first game of the Pac-12 season. That was one of the last games. How does that figure out with the Pac-South race? And a week and a half later, poof.
Yeah, it's all gone. I think that's again one of the things that I said, right, is that I hadn't felt that optimistic in a very long time, and it was actually very exciting to see that. But it's actually kind of some of the conversation that we'll get into is that, it's a testament to how fluid everything really is, right? And how everything changes so quickly relative to what we're learning. And a lot of people are saying, it's shocking that a lot of the conference or the presidents or athletic directors or anyone else really wasn't looking at this sooner. So what do you think they were doing in the meantime?
Well, I truly believe that the myocarditis, the heart ailment that really was the last straw, or maybe even some would call the game changer, no pun intended, that caused both the Big Ten and the Pac-12 just to rethink everything, is really what happened over here in the last 2 weeks. And I know some folks are frustrated that, okay, how can we talk about such a serious ailment that supposedly was not there prior to July 31st, when Pac-12 goes out and makes an announcement on the schedule. I forget if the Big Ten had a very specific schedule like the Pac-12. They may or may not. I'm not.
I do remember they did. Yeah,
they did. Okay, and July 31st comes, like you said, everybody has hope. Here we have a schedule, conference only.
Right.
You can really start talking about football in a serious manner. And the Big Ten reported that they had at least 10 players who had that myocarditis, heart ailment. These are all players that were infected by COVID-19, were able to recover. And I don't know how hard their battle was with COVID-19 in terms of fever, coughs, loss of smell, loss of taste, all the usual symptoms that we do hear about. But when they were checked out by the medical staff of some of those Big Ten schools, that heart condition was discovered. It's a condition that basically does not allow your heart to pump blood in and out as it should. Ray Anderson, ASU's athletic director, talked about this condition being one that claimed his dad at a very young age of early 30s.
Right.
So basically, my understanding is that the advice of those doctors in the Big Ten to those players were, you better not lace them up or put on the pads ever again. And by the way, it wasn't only football players that got infected with this. I mean, it was student athletes at large.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anybody at ASU that it happened, but I was told also student athletes in the Pac-12 really mirrored the condition that was happening with some of the student athletes in the Big Ten. Now, I'm not saying that it didn't happen in the other Power 5 conferences that right now are planning to play.
Of course.
But nonetheless, this was, as I mentioned, a really true game changer and just a new wrinkle, if you will, that this pandemic entered. And for the Big Ten and the Pac-12 was just a bridge too far. And they decided that really until they can figure out how to combat this pandemic better, maybe have better medications a few months from now that can prevent people infected of having this heart condition, that it's in their best interest to delay football and really all fall sports at least until January 2021. And here we are.
Right. And so one of the things is, now thinking back at the timeline, Michigan State had a big outbreak. They had like 14 student athletes. I think Rutgers had another one that had like maybe 20 or so that had another one.
Yep.
So there were outbreaks in member schools that probably led to it. So that's interesting that we're seeing that. But one of the things that you just shared, and I didn't catch on to this mostly because maybe I'm just not that smart enough, but what you said was is that the what the athletic directors and the conference were seeing is that the athletes had in the conference, meaning in the Pac-12, had mirrored what was happening in the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
They again, there hadn't been any announcements as to how many people have been testing positive. So
Correct.
two things, right? One, it almost feels like there's actually more student athletes that tested positive than we are led to believe. Because two, if it mirrored, that means that there's a good solid number of student athletes that have that condition.
Yeah, I mean, some schools in both conferences decided not to report
Right.
ongoing COVID-19 positive results. Arizona State was one of them.
Right.
It's up for debate if that's something
Okay.
that, you know, an ASU fan would support or not support. I mean, I know some of the national media was attacking schools like ASU that have not been transparent with their positive test, and sure, right. I mean, it really goes into the weeds in terms of privacy issues, HIPAA laws, if people are familiar with that.
See, that's interesting, though. You're just saying the number of students, not which students. So that's not
correct.
So I don't know how that's a HIPAA violation, but somewhere, someplace. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure that I'm making this crystal clear that it's not only football players in both conferences.
Understood.
There are other student athletes that are on the campuses of both of those conferences in different sports, mainly the sports that are considered fall sports like volleyball, cross country, and soccer, and a sport like basketball, which is considered a winter sport. But even before the pandemic began, they had baked into their off-season schedule, if you will, a period in July where they were allowed to have limited workouts with coaches and players. I think it's like 3 players at a time or something like that. So it really was just broad, student athlete body, if you will. It wasn't only regulated football, but the medical advice of the professionals in the various schools in both conferences to all the student athletes, whether they've played football or another sport, is that now that you have this heart condition, you're going to have issues down the road. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it really behoove you to medically retire, even though you had COVID-19. Maybe your symptoms were not that severe like others in much older age groups. But now that you have this heart condition, this is something that you really need to be aware of, because it's really going to dictate your life from here on out. And some will say, okay, no different than a CTE, brain trauma condition. Okay, and that's definitely a fair argument. But right now in the sport of football, for example, I mean, you do have some protective gear. The helmets in 2020 are not the same helmets that you had in 1990, so they're better designed to prevent CTE. But right now, we're not at a point where we can talk about any sport, football or other, that is designed to protect student athletes effectively from COVID-19 and from this heart ailment, which was more prevalent probably than anybody thought it would be among student athletes.
And that's what we can, based on some of the research that we're seeing, that is what that's what we know of, right? As of right now, that's what we know of. That happens to be the big one. I don't know if we're entering a steady state in which, okay, we're beginning to know the symptoms and the results a little bit more, but I guess that's one of the big ones that, like you said, impacts their career from a long-term perspective. So given all that, right, there was the announcement, there was a presser, and again, I was able to watch that streamed online. But one of the things that ASU did that I don't know if any other school did was they held a follow-up press conference. Correct. And that's again a testament and a huge shout out to their media availability, which is huge, right? I was actually able to watch that follow-up. First question for you is, did any other schools do that? And 2, what were your impressions?
To answer the first question, my understanding is that most schools did not do that. Ironically, I heard that one of the schools contacted ASU in the middle of their press conference and saying, "Hey guys, are you going to do any press conference with your athletic director or football coach, something like that?" And
Yeah, here's a link.
Yeah, exactly. But my understanding is that most Pac-12 schools did not have that press conference, and you're absolutely right, giving kudos to the sports information department at Arizona State. They've always been big on media availability, not only in football, but really with all their sports. And they thought it was very important to have front and center Ray Anderson, athletic director, or vice president for athletics to be more exact, Herm Edwards, head football coach, and Dr. Krasnow, who was the lead medical expert, the lead medical expert at Arizona State that was really consulting the athletic department at large each step of the way for the last several months with the pandemic. And the questions were tough. I mean, fair questions, but questions were tough for Ray Anderson, for Herm Edwards, for Dr. Krasnow, and they really answered them the best they could. I don't feel that they were evasive in their answers or anything like that. I mean, I'm sure some people watching the press conference may disagree in terms of a matter of opinion, but the narrative was consistent. Health and safety was above all. We were not in a position to accept any waivers from student athletes that did want to play come hell or high water. And this myocarditis heart condition really was an element that wasn't even there two weeks or so ago, and really forced us to do a 180 after we already decided to play in an abbreviated schedule starting late September. So that's really everything that came out of it. Again, you may disagree with the opinions, but I thought that they definitely were transparent in what went behind the decision of it, and Herm Edwards basically agreeing with the Pac-12 decision, which is something we haven't seen from the Big Ten coaches. We saw Jim Harbaugh, most notably, but
a lot of dissension
from Ohio State, Scott Frost from Nebraska. We definitely heard a lot of dissension from those head football coaches that I have yet to hear. I think one Pac-12 head football coach have the same language towards the conference officials.
Which was fascinating, right? Because I think there was a player from Utah that actually tweeted something out earlier saying, you know, not so kind words. So I wasn't exactly sure if the Utah coaches were using him as a proxy. I don't think so. It doesn't feel like it. I think he was just, but a lot of other students, and again, I haven't seen a lot of student athletes, except for him, say anything toward the contrary. Obviously, I think Jaden Daniels said something like, "This is a dream" or something like that.
He's bummed. He's bummed. He's disappointed, but he's not questioning Herm Edwards. He's not questioning Ray Anderson. He's not questioning the Pac-12. And I know a lot of Pac-12 fans are frustrated that the overall passion level of the conference is never going to be that of the other four members of the Power Five conferences. So I'm not surprised to see head coaches from the Big Ten act the way they act. I'm definitely not surprised to hear or read from the other three Power Five conferences, because again, the prevailing notion has been that the passion of every Power Five conference, not named the Pac-12, is just leaps and bounds compared to what us here in the West Coast have. But this may be one of those situations where, you know what, it's great that you're passionate about football, but maybe there are some elements right now that should bring you down to earth and really have you look at a very serious situation from all points of view. And look, I mean, it really irritates me that there's some narrative out there, and I hate to use this word narrative all the time, but media members are rooting against the college football season happening. I mean, come on. You know, this is absolutely ridiculous. I take no joy in not being able to cover not only ASU football, but any ASU sport for that matter until at least January. And that's probably in question right now.
Of course you don't want to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really, really frustrating to hear some fans say that. But again, I think it's just that misplaced passion that, again, more prevalent in any other conference, not named the Pac-12. And that's why it's been so different to hear or really not to hear what's coming out of the Pac-12 compared to the rest of the Power Five conferences.
Which is interesting, right? Because I know that all the other conferences, like we said, we have Big 12, we have ACC and the SEC, still going forward. They're still proceeding headlong into whatever else it is. And this is the
Mhm.
same thing with the NFL. One of the things that just came out that I saw while I was eating was that someone was actually talking about how expensive a bubble would be. I guess the NBA is spending $100 million,
Mhm.
whatever else it is, for a bubble itself in one single location. One thing I was thinking of is like, well, now it's really time for the SEC to flex that money, right? If they are so hell bent on playing, do you think the 14 member schools are going to go ahead and stand up or try to do a bubble light to be able to get football going?
To me, the sport of football is not really conducive to a bubble environment because think of what you're seeing right now with the NBA and the NHL, where you're just having what 3-4 games in one day, teams playing
Hmm.
every other day. Those are two elements that are not really that conducive in a sport of football. I mean, at the end of
Right.
the day, you only have so many hours
Exactly.
to play 3-4 games in each and
And you're
given
not
day.
playing 3.5 hours like football either.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So even the NFL to have a bubble environment, I just don't know how feasible that really could be. I mean, I could see maybe in the beginning of the season or the end of the season, like you said, maybe having 2-3 weeks in a bubble.
Hmm.
I think the logistics would be an absolute nightmare. Not that they aren't already,
Yeah.
but yeah, I just don't see this sport being conducive to a bubble environment. I think
Right.
baseball, and I think we talked about this
Yes.
last time you and I on here. They definitely were more equipped to have a bubble environment. That's something that he talked about a lot. They didn't do it. Here we are, St. Louis Cardinals, Florida Marlins haven't played in what, a week
Right.
and a half at least, maybe even
Maybe
longer.
longer. Yeah.
So the sports right now, and granted it's pro and not college, but the sports right now that are not being able to have a bubble environment are not doing too well.
Yeah.
And the NBA and the NHL, give them credit, they are really mastering the bubble environment to a T. I
Right.
just don't think, and I think baseball's maybe a sport that could have had somewhat of a bubble environment, but football, I just really don't see it happening. So,
Even MLS did a little bit of it. They were able to pull it off
yeah,
too. Soccer was able
yeah,
to as well.
yeah, exactly. So, you and I talked off air before. I'm not rooting for the other conferences to fail. I have colleagues that cover
Of
those
course.
conferences, but for them to truly have a better than 50% chance of starting and ending the season on time, I think that's really, really debatable. So if you're a Pac-12 fan and you're mad that the other three conferences are going ahead and
Right.
having football as scheduled in the fall, let's just wait until it's actually December, whatever, and one of those conferences actually completed the whole season as scheduled. Because to think that there's not going to be some kind of outbreak, how big or how small,
Right.
within any given team of those three conferences, I think really is really a bit naive to assume at this point. So we'll see if
Absolutely.
those three conferences we'll see if those three conferences can really pull this off, because I think it's much harder than people think it is. Baylor and Oklahoma, I think, announced just in the last couple of hours they're going to have 25%
Right.
attendance
Right.
in their stadiums. I think that it really would behoove them just to have the games without any crowd, period. But that's Big 12 for you. The football passion may be a detriment more than an advantage in this case. We'll see.
I think I've always been a fan, and a lot of you guys have probably been seeing what putting out there. It's going to be a grand experiment. Hopefully, the cost isn't too high, but whatever comes out of it, the data is going to be delicious. Whatever it is, whether it's good or bad, we're going to learn something. I just don't know if we want to see it. Like I said, I think we're all rooting for some sort of version of this to be successful, just so this way we know. But I just given, as Ray Anderson said, and who is a conference advisor? Who's the medical advisor to the conference? Who was
Uh,
that?
The doctor, his name is Dr. Krasnok. I don't have the first
Yeah, I
name
don't
in front of me.
remember. Yeah, but he was saying as well, both Ray Anderson and that doctor were, it's about about the level of community spread. It's
Mhm.
still, even though Arizona and California and other states aren't considered hotspots anymore, the
Correct.
spread is still so high that it's still a concern for outbreaks and everything else. So I think that's where that's going to get the rest of the schools in trouble. But at least there's going to be some data that prove that. And that was kind of one of the other things that we had talked about on the pre-call before the stream crashed was, is the grass really greener over there with those three conferences? And I think you just answered it right. It's like, it's kind of still a wait and see.
Sure.
Let's see what happens. And the first games aren't until late September, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we still have a good 6 weeks before anything else happens. So we will figure that one out. One question, and I saw this and you retweeted this, and I haven't seen it because I think Reddit CFB deleted it, but there was a comparison of the medical advisors between conferences, right?
Yes.
There was, and I still can't find it, and I'm trying to find a source, and I can't find a post everywhere in Reddit for it, but I want to dig it up. I think what it said is that there was 24 people on the Pac-12 medical advisory group that were, I think, of the 24, 9 were from the schools, and the remaining 15 were independent advisors. Have you seen
I
that anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that tweet before it got deleted, I was able to copy and paste it, and
Same.
maybe we can find it. Maybe I can find it during my call. But I even thought that they actually was split down the middle, 12 and 12, where I guess
Okay.
each Pac-12 school had a medical representative, which would make sense.
Okay.
And then there were 12 medical experts who were independent of any school.
Right.
And I think it was compared to the SEC, if I'm not mistaken,
You are correct.
that tweet that got deleted, and none of the medical representatives over there were independent. So
it was
again,
14. It was 14. It was a team of 14, and it was one from each school. Each
yeah,
someone from the medical staff that is part of the athletic department, not necessarily part of the medical school or whatever they have. It was someone as part of the athletic department.
So not to belabor the point about football passion and how it can be really a deterrent rather than a strength.
Right.
But that is one example. I mean, look, I'd love to live in utopia where nobody has a bias. I have a bias. You have a bias.
Of course.
I mean, maybe on different
Clearly,
topics, but
I got a bias.
but our biases do exist, and you know, even the NFL. I mean, we hear so many stories about team doctors being just rogue doctors sometimes, and having players play when they have no business of playing, just because they feel that pressure from the head coach, from the general manager, from the owner sometimes. And I have no doubt in my mind that those doctors from the SEC felt the pressure and felt that they had that they had to toe up the line. And sure, I'm sure they made some public statements and statements on record that's gonna cover their behind if and when you know what hit the fan. But
exactly,
to not have independent medical experts, you're basically getting the answers that you wanted to get all along, and not really answers that are rooted in facts and rooted in truth, and that's really, really a shame. And again, I am not rooting against those three conferences. If they're able to pull it off, God bless them. But if they're not able to pull it off, I really hope it's not going to be a matter of just dozens and dozens of players, coaches, and support staff being infected, and again having that horrible heart ailment, even though they might have just been coughing for 1 week, and that was the extent of the coronavirus symptoms. So I just really, really hope that that's not going to be the case, because I know if a medical expert from Vanderbilt would feel horrible if there was some kind of outbreak of 20 players / coaches / staff members that got infected, and some of them have those heart ailments, and God forbid they die 5-7 years down the road because of that ailment.
It just accelerated it.
It would be something that would weigh on your conscience so heavily, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the other things I'm trying to dig up. Again, everyone, Hod Rabino from Devil's Digest, please give him a follow on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Please visit the Devil's Huddle uh, off the Rivals Network. And thank you for your questions in the chat. As always, be sure to post those. We'll also be posting this recording within the huddle once I share that with Hod, so you'll be able to revisit this if you haven't seen that. But my question back to the medical advisors for the Big 12 and the ACC. The ACC had a doctor from Duke come out, I believe, and said that, hey, this is something that is possible. But again, that is someone that is school specific, right? I don't think it's someone from the outside. Have you seen because I don't think they've posted what the makeup was the medical advisory board for the Pac-12, nor the Big 10. So I wasn't sure if you've heard any numbers as to who's advising the ACC or the Big 12 or the SEC. Well, actually, I guess we do know the SEC, but anyway.
Yeah, no, I've not heard about the ACC and the Big 12. I've not heard the makeup of those those medical experts, but I'd like to believe, and I'm not saying this in a positive way, that if they are just plowing through and playing football in the fall, that the number of independent medical experts is very small if it really exists to begin with, and it's really the school's medical experts that they really have been the talking. And again, are they speaking their truth? Are they talking under duress? That's something we'll probably never know the real correct answer. And again, I just really hope that they're not making a mistake because again, as a medical expert of School X, to see an outbreak happening just because you try to attempt to play football in the fall, like I said, I would not want that to weigh in my conscience, especially if you, God forbid, hear about a fatality from this some years down the road.
Now, the other, absolutely. And to that end, right, given that the medical advice, I think it was the Big 12 that actually talked with someone, or was it Conference USA? Maybe it was Conference USA that was talking with some medical advisors today as well. They didn't make an announcement, but I think they were meeting medical advisors, right?
Yeah, correct. The group of five, basically, I think right now we're comfortable taking the lead from the Power Five, and the majority of the Power Five is still playing, so they need to play too. As a lot of us know, those group of five schools are really dependent on those non-conference games in terms of their budget. That's a huge chunk of their budget.
Absolutely.
So I'm not justifying the position that they're expressing right now, but not that the Pac-12 and the Big 12 are not going to have to do some financial maneuvering to account for this loss of revenue, but that goes double, triple, quadruple for a Group 5 school that really doesn't generate much revenue aside from those non-conference games against Power 5 conference teams. So I can kind of understand the very tough position that they're in. Not that other schools from other conferences are in any easier positions, but I understand where it comes from. I think it was one of the medical experts of the Big 12. Said, look, we're planning to play, but if we need to pull the plug, we'll pull the plug. So that's the first concession I've heard from those other three conferences to date. And I don't know, maybe an ACC or an SEC medical official is going to have the same tone later this week or maybe even next week. Because look, everybody wants to cover the behind. Everybody wants to have that exit strategy. Because look, it's one thing for a coach, a university president, an athletic director to talk about medical issues. And if they're wrong, maybe they're wrong. But when you have a medical professional, when you have that PhD in your name, you better be really, really careful about what you say and not say about a medical topic. So I think some of those medical experts right now are in the shadows. And those that are talking, like I said, they're making sure that they're covering all bases.
And that's interesting to your point, right? Because a Big 12, given that latest statement, really allows them to play the fence, right? They're not like, we're full in with them, but we're all not full in it. But it's like we still give a position of or a perception of autonomy, right? That we can do that. So it took the Pac-12 and the Big 10 a week to cancel?
I know that these cases started creeping up the first week of August, maybe towards the end more towards the end of that week. But yeah, I think it was just a matter of probably a long weekend, if you will,
Yeah.
of all this transpiring, of seeing a lot of these myocarditis cases, both in the Big Ten and the Pac-12.
Right.
And I mean, I'm not saying it was like a perfect storm where they all happened at the same
Of
time.
course.
I'm sure there were some cases happening in July, probably in June, but it looks like the number of those cases definitely reached an alarming level, whatever that alarming level is, in both of those conferences,
Right.
to come to the tough decision they came to yesterday.
But it was a week ago is when the Pac-12 schedule was released, right? It was a week ago.
It was a week ago, Friday, so July 31st.
So it was only a few days then.
Yeah. I would say probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 days following that Pac-12 announcement that, again, whatever that alarming level of cases is, it reached that that threshold at that time, and really had conferences speak out loud to some extent about the possibility of postponing the season. I was told that some players at ASU were getting pretty thick hints from their coaches as early as Monday this week that just be ready. This can probably happen. So just like maybe it wasn't a shocker for you and I, it was probably not a shocker for a lot of student athletes at ASU and elsewhere.
Because they knew. So that, given that, right? One, I think it's the opinion that the SEC is going to be the last conference to say, okay,
sure,
we're postponing fall sports. But how long do you think it is before the Big 12 or the ACC cancel? Or do you think they're going to ride it until September and then maybe not say anything till then?
I think they almost back themselves in such a corner where they have to go through the preseason from start to finish.
Okay.
And
that means practices. That means everything.
Padded practices more than just the walkthrough with the ball, which a lot of Pac-12 teams, including ASU, were engaged in before this announcement came down. I have a feeling that probably no more than 3 weeks into the season, those conferences are going to have to pull the plug. I believe. Because
that makes sense. Because that starts when? End of August when they can start doing that?
Well, I mean, as far as their schedules, I think the schedules right now are all uniform more or less for September 26th, maybe September 19th. I really didn't look at each and every conference schedule.
But you were going to say, sorry.
Even though you're playing a school from your same conference, and by the way, those schools are also still playing non-conference teams, which still baffles me, because another issue that we talked about, look, you'd like to think that all the schools in any given conference are adhering to the same health and safety guidelines. So maybe there's some kind of measure of comfort.
Of course.
When Vanderbilt is facing Alabama. I mean, maybe they're not going to get their asses kicked on the scoreboard, but maybe in the health battle, it would be an even matchup. But when those schools from the Power 5 conferences are playing Group 5 schools that, and this is again an issue that I brought up here and elsewhere, simply don't have the money to put all the health and safety regulations in place, and now you're a defensive lineman, an offensive lineman facing each other, breathing into each other, spitting on each other. I mean, whatever the case may be. Okay, and I'm not saying it's any better with a defensive back in press coverage on a wide receiver. I mean, the amount of lack of social distancing that takes place then. What happens at that point?
That's funny.
This dang coronavirus is asymptomatic. You can have players feeling all peaches and cream, after a game, a week after a game, 2 weeks after a game, and just spreading among their teammates, and spreading it among their coaches. It's just really, really hard to predict how quick this community infection can take place. And again, when you talk about schools that are outside of your conference, at least in my humble opinion, you're increasing the odds that much more. I mean, give credit to the Pac-12 that they decided on a conference-only schedule, and that really was the first and foremost reason
Hmm.
that we don't know what schools like, in ASU's case, NAU,
Right.
NAU, UNLV, and even BYU for that matter. We don't know
Absolutely.
if they have and can they to begin with follow the
Exactly.
same safety and health procedures that we invested so much time and so much money in. Why go out there and risk it? But
Yeah. Are
the
they
other part,
doing the minimum or better? Exactly.
exactly, yeah. And the other Power conferences are just being really carefree about this. I just saw Iowa State scheduled a game against Louisiana.
Hmm.
I mean, again, I mean, that University of
Good.
Louisiana athletic department, they don't have the same resources as Iowa State, and vice versa. How
Nope.
does that work out in preventing the transmission of the disease? I guess we'll find
Absolutely.
out next month.
That's actually a very good point, that they've actually painted themselves into a corner. So they have to actually wait for the paint to dry before they can do anything, right? And I think that's going to be very interesting because, no, I have you for a few more minutes, for just about 5, 6 more minutes. But to that point, right? If they do and they have to cancel, what is SEC? What is the SEC's excuse, right? Because the Pac-12 conference has said, okay, it's the difficulty of having standard testing. It's the difficulty of making sure everyone's consistent. Well, if the SEC
Mhm.
has so much money and it matters more, so then now, and if that's really all it's about, so why aren't you throwing this money that you're earning hand over fist from ESPN and everywhere else to ensure that football is happening? Is it because you don't want to spend it, or is it because you can't, because you don't know how? I mean, I think that's actually the next one I'm kind of excited about. What's your excuse, SEC? Why didn't it happen?
Again, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I just feel the way that they look at football, especially compared to the Pac-12, but I would say even compared to the other Power Five conferences, is just at a different level. It's football craze on steroids,
Mm,
and I'm fully cognizant of the fact that it does carry some positives,
of course.
but they're just not going to pump the brakes for anything. And maybe some
Yeah.
things don't deserve the brakes to be pumped for. The pandemic, I would argue, is a different thing. I believe that the rainy day fund of the SEC might be even bigger of that of the Big Ten,
Hmm.
let alone the other conferences.
Right.
So they, I think, can write
They could weather it.
fat checks to their members if they need to. Trust me, those members make money anyway.
Exactly. They're
I mean,
making a ton of it anyway.
I mean, the athletic department of the University of Alabama is not pinching pennies anytime soon.
No.
I mean, not this
Exactly.
century, not the next one. So
Right.
you're not going your bottom line, dollars and cents, is never going to be hurt if you're an SEC school, in my opinion. Now, don't pretend to know the finance of the SEC.
Exactly.
That's one assumption that
That's the
I would go to
impression.
Vegas. Yeah, that's one assumption I would go to Vegas and bet a lot of money on. But it's just that notion, we have to play football. This is what we're
Yeah.
all about in the South. What the hell are we going to do with our Saturdays? There's only so many sales Home Depot or Lowe's can have on
Yeah.
a weekend. I mean, that's basically going to
Exactly.
be their answer. So they're going to try. They're going to try come hell high
Yeah.
water, and I really hope the collateral damage is going to be minimal before they feel that they need to pull the plug, and that we're not talking about a scenario where there was an outbreak in 6, 7 member schools
Right.
numbering by the dozens before they did something. I really hope that it doesn't come to that point, but will I be shocked if it comes to that point? No, because like the SEC says, it's different here.
It is, and that's what they did. Even those Georgia high schools. That one that posted that kid that posted that picture of that
Yeah,
high
got
school that was
suspended.
packed, because she got suspended, unsuspended, and
Yes.
now the school's closed.
Okay.
So it's a full circle. It's a full circle. So
Yep.
a couple quick questions from the chat.
Sure.
Let's see. Ralph Amsden, take the calendar off the wall. That's actually good.
Hashtag.
Exactly. Let's see. Does a cancellation prolong Larry Scott's tenure, or do you think the leadership will just let it expire?
I think leadership would just let it expire, because switching a commissioner, no matter who the replacement is, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of this uncharted waters, would probably not be the wisest thing to do. And I feel that ultimately, if the majority of athletic directors wanted the conference to go in a certain direction, let alone the presidents and the chancellors of the schools, Larry Scott would pretty much be powerless in that case. The bigger question to me, and I don't know if it's been asked by the chat or asked by
Not
somebody
yet,
else,
no.
are we going to see a football season or even a basketball season for that matter in January? And that to me is at best a 50-50 proposition. I think a Pac-12 bubble could possibly work just because it's a basketball sport that's conducive to a bubble. But I don't mean to end our conversation on a grim note, but if you told me, look, you're really delaying the inevitable and there's not going to be a football season in January, I'm not really going to fight you on that. To me, it's at best, as I mentioned, a 50-50 proposition, because a lot would have to change in the way you can combat this dang pandemic now in the next 3 months. And if that's realistic, if that's even feasible, that's really anybody's guess right now.
They have to really start talking about a plan for a Pac-12 bubble now. It has to be now.
Sure.
Because because I mean, we said, what is that? We have September, October, November, December. We have 4.5 months. If they start talking about a Pac-12 bubble in even late September, it's too late, because I think they could pull it off, but it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that there was uncertainty all throughout this pandemic, and maybe it went away starting in July 31st for about a week and a half or less. And now we're just back to square one as far as uncertainty. Anybody that tells you they absolutely know, for good or for bad, what's going to happen come January 1st with the full sports is absolutely lying. It's just really anybody's guess.
It is.
And maybe like this myocarditis was a negative game changer. Maybe there's a positive game changer that reveals itself in September, October, November that gives you legitimate hope this time that something could happen in January.
Exactly. And I think it's all about community spread. I think community spread is the first thing that needs to come down. And then once community spread comes down, not necessarily under control, but once it's, actually it would have to be under control, because you would have to have limited stuff out there spreading around before anything else happens. Because I know I saw an interesting tweet about that, about even if they were on campus, let's say athletes are on campus, limiting their activities to athletics still reduces the chance of them catching it from interactions with students. But if one thing slips, actually I saw that there was a Republican senator traveled back to Georgia for a family reunion, wore a mask, all for but I think he said 5 minutes, when he walked into his grandparents' house to get something and walked back out. When he walked in, he took the mask off, and when he walked back out, he put it back on. He caught it within that tight window. So it has to be, even when you're militant, a tiny slip up is what's going to get you.
Yeah, and just to build on that point,
sure, please.
The ASU football players, for example, but they really stands true for the whole student athlete body at ASU and really any other Pac-12 schools. It's really been drilled into their brains. Say, look, you gotta be disciplined when you leave campus.
Right.
And I don't think that the postponement of the football season is really going to have them now change their mind and throw caution into the wind. I think that ultimately they have to have the framework of coming to this football facility with a purpose to work out 5 days a week, just to have that structure where they're going into the building one way, exiting another way, not congregating in the locker room, social distancing when they're eating in the cafeteria, just really keeping that routine. And I know it's hard. You've been doing it already for 2-3 months. Not good. They need to do for another 3-4 months. I get that, but that structure is really, really important, just to give yourself a legitimate chance of playing football in January. But I know a lot of folks are saying, okay, well, if you're not playing games, now that you have that risk that on the weekends when they are mingling and mingling, who knows, to some level with the general student body that's already on campus, what's going to happen then? It's just going to require just a lot of self-discipline, and maybe even more self-discipline now that you don't have any games to worry about on the weekend, where you're already quarantined in a hotel if it's a home game or it's an away game. But the self-discipline off campus is really what's going to dictate a lot of this, not only for the general health of student athletes, but really for the general health of every state,
Exactly.
every state at large. The numbers are going down in Arizona. I believe they're also going down in California too. And hopefully, we're sitting here 2-3 months from now, seeing the numbers at such a minimal rate. It's not going to go away.
Right.
It's going to be at such a minimal rate where we can just feel more comfortable saying, okay, you know what? Maybe the Pac-12, for example, could really pull this off and play all this full sports in January. But again, huge unknown. 50-50
Absolutely. Your thought, real quick, yay or nay? Spring ball where they play a full 8 games in spring. Yay or nay?
In terms of full schedule, I don't.
Full schedule during spring.
Yeah, no. I'd like to think they're going to keep to the framework of playing a 10-game conference-only schedule. As I mentioned earlier, if you're going to start playing non-conference teams, you're just opening a whole can of worms and you're increasing your risk level for infection that much more. So I can see them playing 10 games, but I could see them also reducing it to 8 games because one issue that we just ran out of time to talk about is, okay, how do you play 2 football seasons in a 12-month calendar? The big boys in the NFL don't do it, would never dream of doing it. They're going to ask college kids to do it. But if you're talking about, let's say, an 8-game schedule that runs January through March, or maybe February through April, okay, and then play a traditional 12-game schedule starting in September, maybe that's something that's easier to stomach, that's easier to handle from a physical and from a mental standpoint. NFL is probably going to need to postpone its draft to May, maybe even to June. NFL hasn't come officially and said it, but there are some hints being dropped that are willing to do that. They do have an appetite, as they say, to do that. So I cannot see a 12-game schedule in January to answer your question.
But you could see 8.
I could see probably 8 maybe be more feasible than a 10, just to decrease the wear and tear of players that will have to play 2 seasons in a given 12-month period.
Got it. Okay. Well, that'll be interesting. I've kind of already just shot for 2021 because I don't know how athletes are going to recover even if they play 8 games. So, but that's just my humble opinion. I don't know what that is, but
that's definitely a fair point.
But by that point, by January, we just may be jonesing for football. Even if it's ugly, messy football, we'll take it. Even scrimmages, which I would be okay with as well. So I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining in. I will send you the recording of this and make sure that it's available to everyone else. Again, I'm glad we didn't have any technical difficulties this time, and I appreciate you being on here. So thank you. Thank you, everyone who is on the stream right now. We're going to be ending this stream, but I'm going to resume it again in about 7 to 10 minutes with Brad Denny, and we will continue this conversation and talk a little bit more. But Hod, thank you, my man. Appreciate you. Love you. Can't wait to talk with you again.
Right back at you, Rob. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. See ya. All right. And we... Oh. Okay, stop. Yes.